Good night to you, and thank you for joining us. I am Thabo Mdluli, and this is In Focus. Should amnesty be given to those who returned looted goods? This is the question we're asking tonight, and to talk to us about this, I'm joined by the Director of Church and Community Engagement at the South African Council of Churches, Reverend Mzwandile Molo, and former Truth and Reconciliation Commissioner Yasmin Sooka. To be a part of this conversation tonight, you can WhatsApp your questions and comments to 072-110-5584, or you can tweet us tonight at Newzroom 405. Good evening to you all, and thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Good evening to you, Thabo.
Good evening, Thabo. Good evening, Reverend. And good evening, listeners.
Good evening, Yasmin.
Yasmin, let's start with you. I mean, having been involved in a process of a similar nature as far as amnesties are concerned, how does amnesty satisfy transitional justice goals?
Well, amnesties have historically developed in the context of dealing with responsive states to political crimes of the past. And in its broadest context, it really is the absence of punishment for wrongdoing, and is a legal tool that's often deployed by many states to deal with political crimes. And effectively, what that requires is either an amnesty law or an amnesty policy, which will set out, in fact, what the criteria will be and what the process will be. And of course, in our country, it took more than a year to develop the amnesty law. We were quite insistent at the time of the transition that the terms of the amnesty should be part of a discussion which was, part of the constitutional discussions. And in fact, there were parliamentary hearings on the law, because we wanted to ensure that, in fact, every South African who could voice their opinions, but that political parties themselves would, in fact, have some opinion or some word on it. And, of course, victims in our country made their voices known on the amnesty law as well. And what we were clearly, really we wanted to see was that the amnesty would not be a blanket amnesty, but that it would be conditional on perpetrators satisfying a range of requirements, and that it should be done almost in a quasi-judicial way, so that even though this would not come before a court of law, those who would be in charge of administering the amnesty would do it in a transparent, open process where the perpetrators would have to satisfy criteria that was set out in the law, and only after all of the evidence was adduced, that is when they would decide on whether amnesty was granted or not.
We'll come in a little bit more on the criteria and process, but Reverend, let's bring you in. Why does the South African Council of Churches believe that there is relevance in this particular matter to have this discourse on the possibility of amnesty for looters?
Thank you very much, Thabo, and good evening to the viewers. The view we took as South African Council of Churches, noting the recent unrest that we all went through, was that society needs to deploy all its possible ways of restoring not only stability, but restoring a spirit that allows us to build for the future. And in that context, we reflected on what was happening and how society deals with it in a way that is going to reflect not only our anger, which was justified, but also our ability to build and create new possibilities of finding a way out of the darkness that we found ourselves in. And in that context, we analyzed the truth that, one, we are having to deal quite clearly in terms of the law of all those who are perpetrators, orchestrators, and instigators of what we went through as a nation. There is absolutely no debate for us around that. Secondly, there was clear understanding that those people who had a criminal intent and who were in the forefront of executing their criminal behavior must be people who need to be arrested, and the law must take its course. Yeah. Then we say to ourselves, there was a massive response of people in the thousands who went out there and participated in looting. And that looting is wrong. That looting is against the law. And those people need to find a way to be arrested and be dealt with. But then we made a call to those who are looters. And our call was to them, based on our belief that people can see and know when they have done something wrong. That when they search their consciences and they find that indeed the reason, whatever the reason, their participation in that looting is an injury, not only to their personal morality, but to public morality. How is it then that you encourage those people to find a way to participate in a way that restores their own personal moral injury that they've done to themselves and the moral injury to society? And we thought the best way to look at it is to encourage them to bring back the things that they've stolen and put them back into the hands of the authorities. But to do that, you needed to allow them to realize that their search of their own conscience will not be a place that allows them to be arrested and be put to jail. Yeah. And we thought the best way, therefore, to ask the country to look at, and we made the call to the relevant institutions, to look at the possibility of saying those who search their consciences and found where they've done something wrong to their personal morality, to the morality of society, when they bring back that which they found to be wrong, they need to place themselves in a position where society allows them to express their guilt feelings, express their contribution back, and restore to society the things that they've stolen as a way of creating this new way of, way out of that darkness.
And you do not believe that the normal justice system would provide an adequate response that will be able to move them out of that darkness and speak to their personal internal morale and have that restored?
Our view of the justice system, indeed, and quite correctly, sometimes it is dependent on who's guilty and who's not guilty, and therefore it applies the laws to find you guilty rather than finding a way to help you get yourselves out of a deep spiritual moral darkness that you found yourself in participating willingly and willfully. But having done that, find a space where you talk to yourself and realize that I need to find a different way to express my beingness, ubuntu bam. And the best way to do that is for me to take back that which I have stolen and bring it back to the places where it could be taken back by society. And if I do that, society, this is our call to society. Society can find a way then to say, how do we encourage you to do that without us trying to get you into jail in a manner that also restores your soul and the soul of society?
Yasmin, can you come in here? Is there space in terms of permissiveness of amnesties and justification in law, articulated or otherwise, that would give space for that kind of restoration of your internal moral campus?
Well, I think that, of course, South Africa has led the world on really developing amnesties as a moral tool that was really meant to deal with the darkness of the apartheid years and to find ways in which people would come voluntarily forward and in fact make a confession or tell the truth or full disclosure about the crimes that they had perpetrated, and provided they were able to prove in the past that they had done this in pursuit of the policy of either the apartheid state or the liberation movements, and they were able to show that in fact this was not done out of malice or greed, then of course amnesty was granted. And I think from what the Reverend is saying, obviously the voluntariness of people coming forward and in fact returning the goods that they looted does in fact create the potential for such a process. The difficulties, of course, are that you have to be careful that what you do doesn't in fact deepen impunity in the country, and that we find ways in such a process to guarantee the rule of law and also to ensure that we have both equality and fairness in the process. Because under our law, technically people could plea bargain And in a plea bargain, of course, there would be a conviction, and of course, then the sentence could be set aside. The problem, of course, there is that you then have a conviction for life. And when you look at the many young people who were part of that, that would ruin absolutely any chances they have for the future. And so when we talk about this, I think what would be very important is you have to have some sort of law and policy. You also have to decide on who would benefit from such an amnesty. Will it just be people who've returned the goods that they looted? When we talk about goods, are we talking about food, or are we talking about other items as well? What in fact will the threshold be for us to accept that these are people in fact who should be the beneficiary of such a process? Then of course the question is, who's going to administer it? Will it be a committee? Will it be some form of commission or court? Because one of the realities, of course, of the current process is that we're also dealing literally with thousands of people. And quite frankly, the justice system and the NPA will not have sufficient evidence, in fact, to process these looters. You've heard the NPA say that already. And so in order to deal with that, we have to find a way which preserves the rule of law, but at the same time provides an opportunity for those who voluntarily show contrition and remorse, and they return the goods, and they make a full disclosure about what they were involved in. I think what I would like to see is that they tell us, were they invited by cell phone messages or WhatsApp messages? Did somebody instigate them?
Yasmin, there you're venturing into conditional amnesty, and we'll unpack that a little bit more when we come back. Let's continue with this conversation after the break. Reverend Mzwandile, Molo, as well as Yasmin, Sooka with us tonight. Let's get your views as well on WhatsApp 072-110-5584. Tweet us at Newzroom 405. In Focus continues in a moment. Welcome back with us here on In Focus, Newzroom Afrika, channel 405. Thanks for staying on. Should looters be given amnesty? That's the question we're asking tonight. Let's get your views in a moment on WhatsApp. But with us tonight, Reverend Mzwandile Molo as well as Yasmin, Sooka. And we are, of course, evaluating the strength and successes of amnesty as a tool for transitional justice. Reverend Molo, some of the crimes and transgressions committed involve a loss of life. But not only that, a loss of livelihoods, particularly for the victims, the shop owners who have lost their livelihood, who have lost their careers in most instances. Will granting amnesty not somewhat drown their call for justice, and their call for justice will remain unresolved?
If I can jump in, Thabo, where Yasmin left, the part of the truth is that the amnesty that we are talking about is one that is conditional. There is no blanket amnesty that says you are just given amnesty. It is conditional on you performing certain things, and those things are what we call for. And I think there is some value in what Yasmin puts on the table as to how best to deal with those things, because it really expands the depth of what we are dealing as a nation. So the second thing is we have called for amnesty as the SACC, not outside of a general response to the issues of justice. We are calling for amnesty not because we create an exit point for those who are criminal in intent. We are saying our response collectively as a country must be a response that gives clear and ear to the cries of those who have lost their jobs, who have lost their livelihoods, who have lost their businesses. As a result, in the same statement where we called for amnesty, we made a call for a restorative fund, for a fund that we as society can make available to those who have lost their businesses. And we are out there stretching out a hand to them and say to them, we want to work with you to restore your businesses into some sound footing so that you're able to build a future not only for yourselves, not only for those you employ, but for the communities around where you work. So it is not only a talk to hear what do we do to those who have bring back the things that they've looted. It's a commitment also to those who have lost businesses. And we're quite heartened to hear the measures that the president announced yesterday. And some of them might need to be fleshed out, some of them might need to be deepened, but the commitment must be that we as a country are committing to make sure that the people who have lost a lot, we invest back in them so that they are able to restore their own work and their own businesses and their livelihoods. Therefore, we are not simply saying bring back and society washes its hands. Yeah. We are saying society works together with those who have lost to rebuild their lives.
But is that not counterproductive to the judicial and legal processes? I mean, how does that stop the would-be perpetrators from committing violations in the future?
The point made, and I understand that society is very loath to jump into conversations like this because we do not want to create impunity. We do not want to create a sense that people can get away with doing whatever they want to do in the context of the country. And Yasmin has clearly said, and we agree with her, that part of this, it must be a system that allows us to keep together the rule of law. It must be something that allows us to do it in a manner that makes sure that perpetrators of criminality do not think this is not a way for them to get away with it. So how do we create a system that takes into account the realities of dealing with crime and dealing with those who act in criminality, but at the same time deal with those who are learning and finding new ways of making sure that for themselves and for the sake of the country, they can learn from what they have done and put the future of the country in the right path. And that demands creative thinking. That demands a way of making sure that we as a society, our sense of justice is one that is deep enough to deal with these contradictions and these calls on ourselves. Yasmin just reminded us, and we as SACC take that into account. Prosecuting these thousands of people who participated in this activity will be a tremendous strain on the justice system of our country. From arrest to prosecution, that will take a long time and needs to be done in certain ways. So we are creating a space where we also allow ourselves as a country to find some way out of a dark place that we think we can, if we work together, we can find a way to do that. Yeah. And I don't want to deviate from the point. We are also wanting to make sure that in the quest to deal with this challenge for justice, we do not end up with those who are simply vulnerable and they become the poster child of the criminal prosecutions, whilst those who are powerful, those who have got enough resources, hide somewhere where we cannot get hold of them.
Right.
Those are the kind of conversations.
I'm going to come into that in a moment. How do we ensure that we become even-handed in our administration of this process? But Yasmin, on the flip side of it, of course, there is a question that is being asked. Some people were purely doing this out of hunger and they were hungry. They stole meal and probably fish oil or tomato sauce or cool beans. Are these serious violations worthy of the state's limited resources?
Well, I think you're asking the appropriate question, because if you look at our history, we've actually allowed amnesties for what I would call the most heinous crimes, crimes that a state has legal and moral obligation, both at an international and domestic level, to prosecute. And of course, in our country, the reason we've had impunity around the serious crimes is because the conditionality of the law was not respected. And in fact, the state failed to do what it should have, which was to take all of those people who did not apply or who were refused amnesty. They should have prosecuted them. And that 26-year period is what has led to impunity for what I would call some of the gravest crimes in our country, including corruption. But if we could do that for those sorts of crimes, then there's a huge question. Do we really want to flog the judicial system with people who are hungry and who stole mealie meal or stole bread, or as that youngster who went to Mr. Price, stole a pair of underpants? Is that what we want to criminalize? Because that in effect would be what we would be doing. And so that is why I'm saying that if we have such a process, we need to craft that very carefully so that we actually work out who should be the beneficiaries of such a benefit. At the same time, within the process, we would have to work out how do we allow for the voices of those businesses, those individuals who in fact this has affected deeply, people who've lost livelihoods, who've lost their jobs, who've lost whatever it is that they own. And so this process would have to be quite even-handed. Yeah. But we would also have to be very careful. There's a threshold beyond which we should not go. I, for instance, would want to say that if you were the kind who drove up with your Mercedes-Benz or a bakkie, and in fact you helped yourself to luxury goods, or you're the person who tried to blow up factories, this should not apply to you. If you're somebody who caused the loss of life, it should not apply to you. And so these are the kind of questions we would need to work out. The other thing, of course, is the question of what is the contribution of people giving back to our society? If they're not going to be convicted, if they're going to in fact benefit from such a deal, what kind of community service will they engage in? And this is where our amnesty process went wrong. There was no obligation actually on perpetrators to make good to either our society or to the victims that they directly affected. And that is why in a country like Colombia, they've gone one step further and they've said, yes, you can apply and we will give you amnesty, but it will be on condition that you serve a period of at least 8 years of community service. You will give back to the community that in fact you wrecked. And that was, I think, what the problem is in our country. It was too easy. You could come forward, and if you made a minimum kind of disclosure, you were allowed to get off scot-free. Yeah. But what about the family whose lives you wrecked? And so that morality question and giving back, the contrition, the question of remorse, I think all of those issues were lost. Right. In our process. And so if we go forward like this, we need to think very carefully about how it can be done. Otherwise, what we will do is create another generation of people who think they can go on doing this kind of thing again.
Reverend Molo, let me take a quick one from Sianda Waltamda on Twitter, saying tonight, if poverty was the excuse for looting, what about the poor people who did not loot? There must be consequence for law breaking unless looting is not wrong. How do you address Sianda Waltamda, who's got that question tonight?
I mean, we do not want to create the impression that poverty takes away the people's power to make moral decisions. We do not want to we don't want to get into that space because we do not believe that's what the moral agency is. One that is something that we believe people possess, and sometimes they make the decision, and the decision sometimes is a bad decision, it's a wrong decision, and we need to deal with that. Mm-hmm. Our intervention is not to say to people, because you are poor, you are free to loot. That's not the point we're making. The point we're making is somebody says, I've examined my conscience and I've come to the conclusion that I have injured who I am, the basis of my humanity. I've injured the basis of the moral character of the country that I want to be part of. I want to make amends to that. I want to act in ways now that restores the moral fabric of my country and myself, and therefore I want to contribute into that journey of the restoration of who we are as a country. And that can include, indeed, some of the ideas that are wonderful that we're hearing of society saying to you, we do not send you to prison. And we do not only not send you to prison, but we do not criminalize you to the point that your future will be determined by a criminal record. But we expect you to work with us in restoring the societal moral fabric. And that includes a basket of things that we work with, that we commit ourselves to as a society. That is something that we as the SACC are very open to and are very clear about. We are saying anybody who stops and realizes that they've done wrong is the basis of us engaging further in what it means then to restore the moral fabric of society and indeed who we are as a nation. It's no excuse for anybody to say, I could loot because I am poor. We are saying there are situations that create the possibility of wrong choices when those choices engage honestly,
right,
and people find a way to seek a path towards a restoration of the country. We should be able to create that space rather than wanting them to go to jail when they want to find a way to restore who they are and who we are as a country.
Let me thank you both for joining us tonight. I appreciate the engagement. That was the Director of Church and Community Engagement at the South African Council of Churches, Reverend Mzwandile Molo, as well as the former Truth and Reconciliation Commissioner, Yasmin.